All right, time to continue the prophetic book of the second book of Esdra, chapter 3. All right, here we go. In the 30th year after the destruction of our city, I, Salathiel, who am also called Esdra, was in Babylon. I was troubled as I lay on my bed, and my thoughts welled up in my heart, because I saw the desolation of Zion and the wealth of those who lived in Babylon. My spirit was greatly agitated, and I began to speak anxious words to the Most High and said, O sovereign Lord, didst thou not speak at the beginning, when thou didst form the earth, and that without help, and didst command the dust, and gave thee Adam, a lifeless body? Yet he was the workmanship of thy hands, and thou didst breathe into him the breath of life, and he was made alive in thy presence. And thou didst lead him into the garden with thy right hand had planted before the earth appeared. And thou didst lay upon him one commandment of thine, but he transgressed it. And immediately thou didst appoint death for him and for his descendants. For him there sprang nations and tribes, peoples and clans without number. And every nation walked after its own will, and did ungodly things before thee, and scorned thee. And thou didst not hinder them. But again, in this time, thou didst bring the flood upon the inhabitants of the world, and destroyed them. And the same fate befell them as death came upon Adam, so the flood upon them. But thou didst leave one of them, Noah, which his household, and all the righteous who have descended from him. When those who dwelt on the earth began to multiply, they produced children and peoples and many nations. And again they began to be more ungodly than were their ancestors. And when they were committing iniquity before thee, thou didst choose for thyself one of them, whose name was Abraham. And thou didst love him, and to him only didst thou reveal the end of times, secretly by night. Thou didst make with him an everlasting covenant, and promised him that thou wouldst never forsake his descendants. And thou gavest to him Isaac, and to Isaac thou gavest Jacob and Esau. And thou didst set apart Jacob for thyself, but Esau thou didst reject, and Jacob became a great multitude. And when thou didst lead his descendants out of Egypt, thou didst bring them to Mount Sinai. Thou didst bring down the heavens, and shake the earth, and move the world, and make the deaf to tremble, and to trouble the times. And thy glory passed through the four gates of fire, and earthquake, and wind, and ice, to give the law to the descendants of Jacob, and thy commandments to the posterity of Israel. Yet thou didst not take away from their evil heart, so that thy law might bring forth fruit in them. For the first Adam, burdened with an evil heart, transgressed and was overcome, as were also all who were descendants from him. Thus the disease became permanent. The law was in the people's heart along with the evil root. But what was good departed, and the evil remained. So the times passed, and the years were completed, and thou didst raise up for thyself a servant named David. And thou didst command him to build a city for thy name, and in it to offer thee oblations from what is thine. This was done for many years, but the inhabitants of the city transgressed, and everything doing as Adam and all his descendants had done, for they also had the evil heart. So thou didst deliver the city into the hands of thy enemies. Then I said in my heart, are the deeds of those who inhabit Babylon any better? Is that why she has gained dominion over Zion? For when I came here, I saw ungodly deeds without number, and my soul has seen many sinners during these 30 years, and my heart failed me. For I have seen how thou dost endure those who sin, and hast spared those who act wickedly, and hast destroyed thy people, and hast preserved thy enemies, and hast not shown to anyone how thy way may be comprehended. Are the deeds of Babylon better than those of Zion? Or has any nation known thee besides Israel? Or what tribe have so believed thy covenants as these tribes of Jacob? Yet their reward has not appeared, and their labor has borne no fruit. For I have traveled widely among the nations, and have seen that they abound in wealth, though they are unmindful of thy commandments. Now therefore weigh and balance our iniquities and those of the inhabitants of the world, and so it will be found which way to turn the scale will incline. When the inhabitants of the earth when have the inhabitants of the earth not sinned in thy sight? Or what nation has kept thy commandments so well? Thou mayest indeed find individual men who have kept thy commandments, but nations thou wilt not find. Okay, that was chapter 3. Wow. Chapter 3, man, it just keeps coming and coming at you. Just, man, so much. So, all right. This one might take a little longer because it's just so much in this. You know, it just really is. So, first of all, in the 30th year after the destruction of Babylon, it talks about Esdra, who also has another name, by the way, called Salathiel. Which if you read in Ezra chapter 1, you'll see his name there also. So he had two names. So let's just keep that content there. And he was in Babylon. Okay, so you have to understand, when Jerusalem was conquered, Ezra was taken to Babylon. So he was a slave in Babylon. And then he was a slave in the Medes, in the country Medes. So he's seen a lot during his time in Babylon. He was there for 30 years. He was a captive, right? And he saw the desolation of Zion. And he was greatly agitated in his spirit. And he began to speak to the Most High. Now, you know, when I read everything here, it makes sense to me. The questions that he have are very reasonable, honest, intelligent questions, because it makes sense what he asks. You know, he starts off and he says he recognizes that the Lord is sovereign. He recognizes that he created the heavens and the earth. He created Adam. He understands the power of the sovereignty of the Most High. He goes over from he understands that Adam transgressed, and that is when sin came into the earth, and that's why we die. And he talks about how every nation walked after its own will. He talks about how mankind just grew. It grew from, nations and tribes and peoples and clans without number. And then he talks about in a certain time that he brought the flood upon the inhabitants of the world. So he destroyed the world. but he didn't. He said the word inhabitants. So that's meaning everything that inhabits the world he destroyed. Okay? And so he talks about why death came upon the world. He talks about why death came upon Adam. But he also talks about how he left a remnant named Noah. And then how they began to multiply again and produce children and people in many nations. And then they became more ungodly than their ancestors. And during that time, while they were committing iniquity, he chose a man named Abraham. So he's going through this whole genealogy, and through every nation and through every, I guess, time frame, he's always bringing out somebody. You know, he talks about Abraham, he talks about Jacob, you know, he talks about, so much of the genealogy of, like, I understand that you're in charge of everything. He's going through history, he's going through, genealogy. He's going through, he even acknowledges what God did to bring the commandments. He talks about, like, he had to go through 4 different things. He said, thou didst bend down the heavens and shake the earth and move the world as thy glory passed through the 4 gates of fire, earthquake, wind, and ice, to give the law to the descendants of Jacob. That's pretty deep in itself. But he also talks about, for the first Adam burdened with an evil heart. Okay? This is really important to understand, this evil part. Okay? Because we're going to talk about that in the future. But he talks about this evil heart is a disease, and it became permanent. So this is why you will never have heaven on earth, because we all sin. We have an evil heart. All of us do. And so that produces sin, and sin produces death, and that produces judgment according to the law. And so, that being said, we move on, and he sees how his heart is troubled, and he notices that in spite he's picked his people, his nation, and he's saying, like, okay, we have sinned, but we acknowledge you, we keep your laws. How is it that these ungodly nations who don't even reverence your name, let alone your laws, how are they prevailing over us, your people? Now, to me, now he said he witnessed a lot of evil in the 30 years in Babylon, and he recognized the wealth. And he just noticing how evil is prevailing. And then in this situation, he's perplexed, because why is God's chosen descendants, his people and his city has been laid over waste to their adversaries, which in this case was the Babylonians. And so he's trying to comprehend, are the deeds of Babylon better than those of Zion? And he questions the Lord. He said, has any other nation known thee besides Israel? Or what tribes have believed in thy covenants as these tribes of Jacob? And he talks about, can you weigh and balance our iniquities and those of the inhabitants of the world, and so that it will be found which way to turn the scale will incline? He said, look, the inhabitants of the earth, there has been no nation that has kept thy commandments so well. You might find individuals, but not nations. And so he's asking the Lord, why are we receiving this punishment when there's other nations who don't even acknowledge thee? They're not they don't even acknowledge him or obey the laws. And here we are, we acknowledge you, we've sinned, obviously, but the consequences of our sins it just doesn't make sense in his mind. He's perplexed. He's agitated in his spirit, and he's asking God some pretty good questions in my mind. I mean, when I read this, I'm thinking to myself, well, yeah. I mean, I understand God's judgment, but I also understand his point. Like, everyone else is sinning, everyone else is doing their own thing, so he's just being honest. He's just trying to understand what's going on, so his heart is not so troubled and anguished and dealing with so much heartbreak. But anyway, chapter 3 is an excellent chapter to read. Like I said, there's a lot more that you can go through to, out of this chapter. He talks about, he brought up David, he built the city in his name. There's just so much, just in this chapter alone, that I understand that he's a slave and he's humbling himself and reaching out to the Lord for answers, and because his heart is just perplexed and agitated, and he just wants to understand and reason within himself and consult the Most High of why this doesn't make sense to him, and why he wants it to make sense in some form. And so anyway, I hope I did okay, or did explaining that, because there's going to be some questions in life that you might have, but it might take a scripture, or it might take a prayer, it might take something for you to, oh, that makes sense, So that's that gold nugget that I speak about. Just that one little gold nugget can help connect the pieces of the puzzle together, so you can, your walk, your faith can increase. But I can tell you, reading the scriptures is really important to take the proper content in its proper context. And a lot of times people they don't do that. So I try to keep it straight with you in that regard. So with that being said, thank you for sticking around for chapter 3. The next chapter is chapter 4, and that'll be in the next video. Have a great day.